ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I just want to thank you for staying. No, there's sound. Thank you for your patience. We're pulling our panel together. I'm Steve Erlanger with the New York Times. I've got to sit somewhere. Anyway, this all feels more disorganized than it should, for which I apologize. Anyway, we're here to talk about the Middle East. We don't any longer have very much time. We have an hour. And so I want to get right to it. As the only American on the panel,
no, I'm an American.
There's quite a lot to talk about. But I just wanted to begin by saying, as much as we've talked about Donald Trump, to me he's done two things. There are two coherent policies, whether we agree with them or not. One is about China, and one is about the Middle East, where he has thrown the power of the United States very clearly on the side of the Sunnis against Iran. He's done that in a big change from the Obama period, embraced Bibi Netanyahu, but also embraced, as we know, Mohammed bin Salman and Jared Kushner's special friend. So we'll see what will happen after the despicable murder of my colleague, Jamal Khashoggi. But I think, as we all know, the Middle East is pretty muddled these days, and so there's quite a lot to talk about. So first, I'm going to sit down and ask Renaud Girard to begin. Thank you. Renaud.
Bonsoir. Alors j'ai un chronomètre, donc je vais essayer de ne pas dépasser les 8 minutes qui me sont imparties. L'année dernière, à la WPC, j'avais contemplé le Moyen-Orient de l'intérieur pour y voir, depuis le début de la décennie, l'affrontement entre deux idéologies, l'idéologie libérale et l'idéologie islamiste, guerre dont aucune des deux n'était sortie vainqueur, mais guerre qui avait pavé la voie au retour du fait national. Le mouvement continue, les nations et les nationalismes ne cessent de se renforcer au Moyen-Orient dans leur rivalité comme dans les alliances qu'elles nouent à l'extérieur. Alors cette année, pour changer, j'ai pris le parti de contempler le Moyen-Orient de l'extérieur. Et ce que je constate de plus frappant, c'est l'impuissance stratégique de l'Occident au Moyen-Orient. Alors ça va être le titre de mon allocution, l'impuissance stratégique de l'Occident au Moyen-Orient. En Syrie, l'Occident n'a pratiquement plus son mot à dire, tout se passe au sein du club d'Astana, c'est-à-dire entre les Turcs, les Iraniens et les Russes. Les Syriens et les Iraniens veulent reconquérir immédiatement la poche d'Idlib, qui est au nord-ouest de la Syrie. Les Turcs, eux, ne veulent pas toucher au statu quo pour garder leurs alliés rebelles en place. Et les Russes sont favorables au contrôle par Damas de cette portion de territoire syrien, mais ils obtiennent actuellement des délais afin de privilégier une voie négociée avec les rebelles. Au Yémen, on constate la même impuissance stratégique d'un Occident incapable de mettre fin à une catastrophe humanitaire qui est née de l'intervention à partir de mars 2015 de ses alliés saoudiens et émiratis contre les rebelles nordistes houthis qui tiennent la capitale Sanaa. Dans le Golfe, les Occidentaux ont été naïfs quant à Mohammed ben Salman, dont ils ont ignoré le caractère violent et qu'ils ont tous qualifiés de grands princes réformateurs. En l'espace d'1 an dans le Golfe, les Occidentaux n'ont même pas réussi à obtenir une réconciliation au sein du Conseil de coopération du Golfe, où on a bien sûr d'un côté le Qatar, qui a réussi à obtenir le soutien de la Turquie, mais qui n'est pas bien sûr dans le Conseil, et de l'autre côté les Émiratis, les Bahreïnis et les Saoudiens, avec les Omanais et les Koweïtis qui veulent garder leur neutralité. En Turquie, les Occidentaux n'ont pas réussi à convaincre Erdogan de conserver la trêve qu'il avait instituée avec les Kurdes en mai 2013. Les Kurdes syriens ont été les principaux supplétifs des Occidentaux dans leur guerre contre les djihadistes. Les Occidentaux ne parviennent pas à leur témoigner la moindre gratitude et à leur garantir ne serait-ce qu'un statut d'autonomie. En Palestine, les Occidentaux n'ont pas réussi à faire prévaloir leur solution des 2 États, dont ils ne cessent de parler depuis 30 ans. On n'en a jamais été aussi éloigné de cette solution des 2 États, et la colonisation israélienne en Cisjordanie est si avancée aujourd'hui qu'on ne voit pas très bien comment on pourrait encore y créer un État viable pour les Palestiniens. En Libye, qu'on peut rattacher au Moyen-Orient, tant les intérêts égyptiens, émiratis, turcs et qataris y sont importants, en Libye, l'Occident a créé un chaos qu'il n'est pas capable de gérer. En Afghanistan, et on peut mettre l'Afghanistan dans le Moyen-Orient puisque l'ONU le fait, après 17 ans de présence, les Occidentaux sont impuissants à faire prévaloir leur vue. En Iran, on ne va pas réussir, les Américains ne vont pas réussir à faire changer le régime en Iran. Nous sommes donc, nous leurs alliés, impuissants stratégiquement. Et nous faisons involontairement le jeu des faucons iraniens à cause, bien sûr, de cette catastrophique dénonciation par le président Trump de l'accord nucléaire du 14 juillet 2015, accord qui avait été remarquablement négocié par le secrétaire d'État Kerry. Alors, comment en est-on arrivé là? Je crois qu'il ne faut pas sous-estimer les fautes occidentales, et j'en vois 3 principales. La première faute est évidemment le néoconservatisme, ce mouvement qui croit qu'on peut imposer la démocratie par la force des armes. Quel terrible gâchis que celui de l'invasion de l'Irak en 2003, certes courageusement dénoncé par la France. Le retrait prématuré des Américains en 2010 a d'ailleurs été une erreur stratégique aussi profonde, parce qu'ils auraient dû se retirer une fois que l'Irak aurait été stabilisé. La seconde faute des Occidentaux, c'est évidemment la soumission de leurs politiques étrangères aux impératifs électoraux intérieurs. Souvenez-vous du rôle de la politique intérieure dans la décision de Sarkozy, 1 an avant la présidentielle, d'intervenir militairement en Libye, et de la politique de Trump avec l'Iran, parce qu'évidemment, Trump veut rassurer sa base électorale. La troisième faute, me semble-t-il, des Occidentaux, c'est leur indécision diplomatique. Ils sont parfois capables de ne pas prendre de décision, d'atermoyer. J'en veux pour preuve, je vais vous donner un seul exemple, la proposition de Churkin de février 2012. En février 2012, l'ambassadeur aux Nations Unies russe Churkin fait une proposition aux Occidentaux, c'est-à-dire aux membres du P3, c'est-à-dire les Américains, les Français et les Anglais, parce qu'il a bien compris que le régime de Damas n'était pas très solide et qu'il fallait peut-être trouver une solution, c'est-à-dire faire partir, avec les honneurs, mais faire partir le président Bachar. Et les 3 Occidentaux ensemble lui ont répondu « Ah non, mais ce n'est pas la peine de négocier avec vous, parce que, de toute façon, de lui-même, Bachar sera chassé d'ici quelques semaines. » Ça n'a bien sûr pas été le cas. Alors la conséquence de ces fautes, de cet effacement des Occidentaux, c'est qu'ils ont été aussitôt, bien sûr, remplacés par la grande puissance opportuniste de la région, qui est la Russie. La Russie a bien sûr deux bases souveraines maintenant en Syrie, mais au-delà, elle a réussi le prodige de faire venir à Moscou en 2017 le roi d'Arabie Saoudite qui l'avait combattu en Syrie. On a vu la réaction de Poutine sur l'affaire Khashoggi. Il n'y a pas d'affaire. Laissons la justice saoudienne traiter l'affaire. Elle a réussi, la Russie, à améliorer ses relations avec un autre grand allié des Américains, c'est Israël. On a vu Netanyahou arborer le ruban de Saint-Georges sur la place rouge à côté de Poutine. La Russie est aussi en force en Égypte, où elle va construire j'ai fini là, une centrale nucléaire. Le général Haftar en Libye est devenu une carte russe, autant qu'elle était autrefois une carte américaine. Alors je pense, pour conclure, que cet effacement de l'Occident au Moyen-Orient n'est pas une bonne nouvelle pour la région, car, qu'on le veuille ou non, les Occidentaux sont aussi, par le passé, venus dans cette région avec de bonnes idées. Souvenez-vous de la conférence de Madrid de 91, souvenez-vous de la poignée de main Arafat-Rabin en 93 à la Maison-Blanche, mais cette impuissance stratégique occidentale au Moyen-Orient est, hélas, selon moi, une réalité à laquelle nous devrons nous adapter. Merci.
Monsieur Renaud, merci. Thank you, Renaud, very much for this overview. It's very, very helpful and very complicated. We only have an hour in total, so I've asked everyone to try to be very disciplined in their interventions. Odeh, over to you.
Steve had said to me, if I go beyond 8 minutes, he will have military reinforcement. So I have to be careful. I would like to comment on what my colleague...
Hear him?
Can you hear me?
Is your microphone working?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, better.
All right. I enjoyed listening to the previous speaker. However, I have a slight difference with him. The US remains the major power in the Middle East. And the Soviets have made inroads, which they lost when Sadat came and threw them out. Today, the Russians have made headways because of their success in Syria, because they flirt with Iran, they flirt with Turkey, and they also flirt with Saudi Arabia. However, the US today and Russia, in my view, have realized that their proxies have to be under control. Otherwise, the Middle East will become more of a mess. And therefore, I expect that the US and Russia will have more control on their allies. Otherwise, they could destabilize the area more, they'll create more chaos. And I don't think Trump or Putin want to get involved in wars in the Middle East. That's, in my view, I'm optimistic that if we can have the two powers try to stabilize the region, get them to talk. Now, in the past, we heard a lot about hegemony, but the way the Middle East is structured today, you have several major regional powers. You have Turkey, you have Iran, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Egypt, and of course, Israel. None of these powers, based on the current situation and the attitude of Russia and America, could never be the hegemon of the Middle East. It would remain unstable, but no one power would dominate. And I think none of these powers want to really have a war going on. I don't think Netanyahu wants to go to war. I don't think the Iranians want to have a war that will be devastating to them. And the Kurds realize that a war will also weaken Turkey because of the Kurdish situation. So an American-Russian cooperation is in the interest of the region. I hope they can cooperate to make the region more prosperous. I would like to talk, when we talk about the region, we always talk about politics. But I think the economics are far more dangerous than the politics. The economics are more complicated. I just want to give you one example. Today, we have 400 million Arabs. By the year 2050, we will have 800 million Arabs. And by the year 2085, according to projections that are realistic, you will have 1.4 billion Arabs. How are you going to feed these people? How are you going to create jobs for these people? How are you going to keep the area stable? Where are you going to get enough water? These are the issues I think that most of us don't talk about. And these are the issues that I think will determine whether the Middle East will be more chaotic, more dangerous, more violent. What happened in 2011 and the various uprisings, for the most part, were mainly economic, but also were due to repression and mismanagement. So that's, in my view, a topic that has to be dealt with. And that's a topic where reform is necessary for prosperity. But to have reform, in my view, you can't be a reformer if you're not a believer in the rule of law. You cannot bring prosperity and growth without an independent judiciary. You cannot grow unless you have a good education. And therefore, the restructuring that has to take place, it begins with education. It begins with creating a culture of venture capitalists. Arabs are great traders. They're great merchants, but they are not industrialists. You see Arabs investing in hotels or in real estate, but I can't find a single Arab capital venture people. There's no Steve Jobs. There is no Apple. It's lacking because you don't have that culture. And a venture culture requires taking risks. And that's something that has to be taught. That's something that has to be embedded. If you look at Arab investments, they're either in bank deposit, treasury deposits, stocks. I find many Arab entrepreneurs in America who have ideas, who want people to finance them, but yet when they go to the region, they can't get any financing because of the risk element. That is, in my view, a key reform that should be undertaken. How do you create entrepreneurs? Otherwise, you're not making things, and that's the problem in the Arab region. They don't make anything. They export oil. I was in China 2 years ago, and I was so impressed. In 1978, the per capita income in China was something like $600. Last year, it was over $7,000. But you see Chinese shirts, you see just Chinese marble. And if the Arabs don't follow the concept of being risk takers, making things, the region will be more dismal. One last thing I want to talk about, and that is Palestine. You know, this issue is not going to go away. Right now, it's not a priority on the international scene, but it's an issue that resonates with Arabs and Muslims. And we keep talking about a two-state solution, but so far, nothing's happening, but it's not sustainable. And we talked about a two-state solution last year. The Arabs have put the Arab peace plan, and I hope Mr. Netanyahu will put an Israeli peace plan, especially in view of what Trump and Kushner are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's great. Look, I mean, the dilemma of the Palestinians seizes me quite a lot, having covered the region some, and Abu Mazen seems very lonely. Succession isn't clear. Gaza and the West Bank are split, and no one really wants to hear about it. And maybe we will elsewhere in the panel, but thank you. Mona, over to you. Do you want this? It's up to you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're not too tired by now, but anyway. Permettez-moi de remercier une fois encore Thierry de Montbrial pour nous réunir une fois de plus dans ce club privilégié qui est devenu le World Policy Forum et dans ce beau pays qui nous est cher à tous, le Maroc. Il reste à souhaiter que son discours de ce matin serve d'électrochoc. C'est notre seul espoir pour l'avenir. And now I will switch to English because I imitate Thierry in everything. So, I would like to start by quoting Thierry de Montbrial's incisive study on the new political era when he says, "The Middle East and the fight against terrorism have suffered directly from the chilling of East-West relations occurring against a backdrop of rivalries for influence rooted in history." Yes, that's quite right. Today there are 5 regional poles today, each vying for leadership of the Middle East: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, and Israel. As it is obvious, 2 are from the Arab region and 3 others outside. So let me start by Egypt, noblesse oblige. Asia, Africa, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Middle East, and the Nile Basin are all geographic entities in which Egypt, a country of 100 million citizens and the biggest army of the region, is either part of or is on the periphery. This geographic position makes Egypt at a crossroads between 2 continents and several geopolitical regions. This multitude of areas, positions, and positioning is an advantage and an opportunity for Egypt just as much as it is a handicap and difficulty. The advantage is that the country can take advantage of this multiple belonging in order to diversify its relations and establish itself as a meeting point. The handicap is that Egypt's neighborhood has so many contradictions and differences of interest that an alliance with one can be interpreted as hostility towards another. The challenge for Egypt is to balance its policy between the various partners and geopolitical areas that surround it. This is the challenge that President Sisi of Egypt is facing today. With several countries in North Africa, Egypt shares the difficulty of reconciling their African Arabism. It shares with those of the eastern shore of the Mediterranean the difficulty of reconciling their Arabism with their Mediterranean identity. So Egypt today is torn between its multiple identities, between swathes of its identity that it derives from its geographical position and its identity markers that it derives from its socio-economic political history. This tension is amplified by neighborhood turbulence. So where should Egypt undertake its leadership and ambitions? What are its strengths? Today, Egypt does not seem to have been able to keep the means of influence that it previously had on the Arab world because of the differences in the Arab world that make it increasingly susceptible to geopolitical fragmentation, which is due to changes in the world order and the emergence of new Arab powers in the Maghreb and the Gulf. However, Egypt holds several geopolitical cards that, if it is played rationally, can be of major assets. One, along with Jordan, Egypt is the only official gateway in the dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis, and therefore a key channel in any solution to this latest conflict. Relations were not optimal between Egypt and Hamas, which President Sisi accuses of destabilizing the Sinai and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in this conflict. In this conflict, Turkey and Qatar saw the opportunity to eliminate Egypt from the peace talks, accusing it of aligning alongside Israel against Hamas. Egypt finally emerged as an indispensable interlocutor in the diplomatic marathon that led to the ceasefire. 3, Egypt has also kept its military supremacy in the region and remains the first army in the Arab world, and all joint defense plans in this area cannot forego this army's contribution. Saudi Arabia, which now aspires to the leadership of the Arab world, despite some differences with Egypt, shows great interest in rapprochement with Egypt, as shown by the visit of the Saudi king to Cairo. Via the Suez Canal, Egypt is the obligatory channel between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, and onto the Atlantic. International trade in general, and specifically the transport of Gulf oil, largely depends on it. Now, what are the vulnerabilities? One is to manage the contradictions that are there. To maintain balance in the neighborhood, Egypt is obliged to invest in reconciling contradictory policies. In its relation with Saudi Arabia, Egypt must manage its own tendency to encourage the Bashar al-Assad regime, who is fighting the Muslim Brotherhood ideology and hostility that Saudi Arabia brings to this regime because of its ties to Shiite Iran. Egypt is still obliged by the Camp David Accords it signed with Israel, while sharing with Arab and Muslim world the aversion developing towards the latter on the Palestinian issue. On the same issue, Egypt has to manage the sense of Arab solidarity with the Gaza Strip, despite it being managed by Hamas, whose ideology is aligned with the Muslim Brothers, which are opponents, if not enemies, of the Egyptian regime. The tensions between Iran and most Arab states continues to frustrate the emergence of regionalism. Now, what about Egypt's relations with the Western world? Take Russia. In Sisi, Putin believes he has found the right match for a military partnership, representing what Putin sees as an ally. A military man who has risen up in politics, trying to rule in difficult circumstances and in need of support. The result was a Russian arms deal with a value of $3 billion backed by Saudi and Emirati funds. As for Syria, Egyptian policies follow Moscow's line. Economically, Russia is building a nuclear power plant, offering Egypt a loan of $25 billion. After more than 2 years, flights have recently resumed between Moscow and Cairo, signaling the return of Russian tourists, which had represented about 40% of Egypt's tourist market. An interesting point here to make is when talking about the Orthodox Church in Russia, interestingly, the Copts, who are Orthodox in their majority, are very supportive of Russia, and their Pope has made it a point to visit Moscow. As for the US, despite apparently warm personal relations between President Sisi and President Trump, Sisi had hoped for better relations with Washington to maintain stability and address the country's economic challenges. Clearly, this has not yet materialized. Moreover, with the unpredictability of the Trump administration and lack of diplomatic talent on the ground, Washington risks ceding hard-won influence in the region without putting up the slightest resistance. And now to domestic politics. In March, voters have re-elected President Sisi to a second term. He has calculated that improved economic growth and greater security will be sufficient to retain the public support despite economic hardships. Attracting foreign investment and international aid is a top state priority, which explains his marathon visits to a plethora of countries, including China, Russia, Vietnam, Kyrgyzstan, France, Germany, the White House, Cyprus, Greece, etc. Furthermore, with democracy under threat across the globe, calls for broad democratic reform have been replaced by more basic ones. Citizens' expectations have shifted from questions of governance and service provisions to those of security and stability. These are the key words of the regime today: security and stability. Interestingly, Sisi's main supporters are those who have suffered most under the Islamic regime of Morsi: women and the Coptic Christians. Women have gained more visibility since he came to power, whether in parliament or at ministerial level. And the Coptic Christians, who have seen their churches destroyed, their shops vandalized, their people slaughtered, attacks until day by the Muslim extremists, see in him a savior. And he has made it a point to talk about all Egyptians as one, not Muslims and Christians. But have Islamists disappeared? Certainly not. Even if they are on the wane, combating ISIS in Sinai remains Egypt's main objective to stop the spread of Islamist insurgency. What can the West do? Focus more on respect for the rule of law rather than democracy and human rights. There are situations where there is virtue in giving supremacy to securing a sound legal framework before the population can be safely consulted. Therefore, more useful initiatives would be actions designed to reform educational systems, encourage Arab and Muslim religious authorities to speak out in ways that delegitimize terrorism. In conclusion, although the basic features of this new era of the modern Middle East are largely unattractive, this should not be a cause for fatalism. Much is a matter of degree. There is a fundamental difference between a Middle East lacking formal peace agreements and one defined by terrorism, interstate conflict, and civil war, between one housing a powerful Iran and one dominated by Iran, or between one that has an uneasy relationship with the United States and one filled with hatred of the country. Time also makes a difference. Eras in the Middle East can last for as long as a century, or as little as a decade and a half. It is clearly in the interest of the United States and Europe that the emerging era be as brief as possible, and that it be followed by a more benign one. Because the Middle East will remain a troubled and troubling part of the world for decades to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Shukran.
Shukran.
Shukran. Miguel, over to you.
Okay, so good evening,
No, you were good. Wait.
everybody.
Okay.
Again, we are witnessing the situation in the Middle East. Again, a new panel about the Middle East. Again, listening to the war and gloomy situation in the Middle East. I don't know what will be our role, because to hear here and there how situation is, how gloomy is the perspective of the future, what could give us some sense of nostalgia of the past, but cannot help us to really find the way to get out of this tremendous mess. I never been confronted in my short period of life, I was getting older and older, of course, every year, with such a situation in the Middle East. Never. Even I will say before the Madrid Peace Conference, we can compare with today, we will never have this such consideration of confusion, chaos, and lack of hope for the generations that live in the Middle East. Well, there is a famous quotation, my dear Itamar, of your former foreign minister, Ebeid, very, very known, that used to say that the Palestinian never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I will make a rephrasing of this quotation. I think international community never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity in the Middle East. And I will say why we are in such a mess today. And I will try to identify three main historical rendezvous, or three main events that have produced the situation of today. The first one was in 2000. 2000, it was the year of the new millennium. We were very happy. We were practically all convinced that peace was at hand. I remember how Barak was elected. Everybody was ready to help Barak. Ebeid going to be having a final peace deal with the Syrians. The situation in the Middle East, United States, European, private sector, everybody was enthusiastic. What happened? We missed this opportunity. And it was only because Barak failed in Geneva, succeeding with Hafez al-Assad. That is the beginning of the end, by the way. How the Syrian talks at Geneva failed. And then Barak moved immediately. I need an agreement with the Palestinians. Let's go to Camp David. And then they failed, and everybody figured out Arafat is the one to blame everything. But then we tried, and there was Clinton parameters, Taba talks, and at this Taba talk, everything collapsed. Sharon was elected, and the traditional way to solve the peace in the Middle East was lost. No more bilateral talks. Well, Ehud Olmert tried, it was the last attempt, but the traditional way to solve this Israeli-Palestinian conflict was abandoned. Second highlight, immediately after, 2001, 9/11. Well, unfortunately, we have this tremendous shock, the collapse of the Twin Towers, and the new approach. It was, of course, the security that was being considered the main and only element in the talks and the negotiation. And it was not land for peace, like in Madrid. It was security, security, security. And so we have to address the security concern in Israel. And then the American administration commit, as our friend Bernard has just mentioned, the strategic historical mistake to intervene in Iraq. And that became, you know, as Hosni Mubarak was to tell me, the major mistake in history. And that's what created this spread of radicalism, terrorism that we are suffering till today. And the third highlight is the so-called Arab Spring. Arab Spring that was considered at the beginning of a new page of the history of Arab society with democracy, rule of law. In reality, it was a covert operation. Let's be frank. It was a covert operation in order to guarantee the chain of energy from, you know, North Africa to the Middle East and to Afghanistan. And so the people in the region didn't really understand what it was. Of course, they want to have democracy, but in which condition? And with the West and Europeans, we were not able to really respond to the new challenge because we were not prepared, and the parties themselves, the Arabs, were not prepared, and was imposed in this new election with the Muslim Brotherhood, as you say, Mona, as a consequence of that. So the three main elements give us the sense of today real chaotic situation. So what to do? Well, we have to go to the basic. That means, number one, as our friend Odeh said, you cannot forget, you know, the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It's going to be there for forever if we don't solve it, but we have to address it in a different manner. We cannot continue to be that we can't return to the negotiation table like it was in the past. No, we have to have a political will to do so. And unfortunately, today, neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis are really prepared to engage seriously. It's even worse than when it was before Madrid. I have to start to back channels to try to convince them to meet again secretly. Can you imagine after 25 years that we have to start as a square one? So we have to get from both sides a real legitimacy to engage. And then the role of third parties. My dear friends, that has been my conviction. The party said that the US is the honest broker. It's the only one who can deliver. And my experience, not my will, my experience has demonstrated to me that only the United States cannot facilitate the deal. Unless we, international community, Arabs, Europeans, and the Americans work together, we will not be able to solve the problem. If we continue to wait for Godot, forget Godot. Godot is not coming. And Godot is now even worse because he's not honest broker. And the Palestinians will not want to talk to them, so they will need the Europeans to advance. Why we don't get and resume what our friend Laurent Fabius tried in Paris? It was a very genuine and honest intention to put everybody around the table to find a solution. It came in a very complicated way, but you have the courage, Laurent, to make everybody work together. We have to invent a new way. Why you don't use energy, for instance, as a catalyzer? Why the southern East Mediterranean countries, instead of fighting for demarcation of the oil and gas reserve, why they don't create like a European a high authority that can share and coordinate the use, the exploration of energy? That will produce something different. Why they don't invent new proposals in order that Israel and Palestinian can find a way? Secondly, we have to really...
1 minute.
1 minute, I know. Secondly, we have to start to have this reconciliation in the Arab world. Bernard, yes, the West, we have a lot of responsibilities. Okay, we are the one, we are absent, we don't help. But what about our brothers or friends, the Arabs? What they are doing themselves? Why they don't get together? After what happened with journalist Khashoggi, why they don't get this occasion to say enough to have the GCC split? Why they don't have, after the Yemen war, why they don't have a kind of new modus vivendi with Iran? Why the Arabs don't decide by themselves to say once we are adult and we want to have a better future for our children, your future generation. And we Europeans can help, and the Americans can help. But not always the Europeans have to be present. No, we have to work together. And I think we can be made. So
great.
My last word is that finally, today situation is gloomy, is desperate, is frustrating. But when we are going to be serious, when we are going to take each of us the responsibility to propose and to act in a manner that we can solve this part of the problem in the Middle East. It will be benefit for everybody. Of course, it will decrease our spending of weapons because it's a paradox that is the region where more expenditure of military budget is in the Middle East. 5% of each national budget is military weapons, and they have increased 60% the military budget altogether. So that is my proposal, and that is my
Miguel,
wish and my desire.
Very, very, very much. And thank you for trying to look ahead a bit. Much appreciated. Itamar, one of the things I've asked you to talk a little bit about is Syria, because it hangs over the region in a very depressing way. So you've written at least 2 books already on Syria and are now finishing a 3rd. So over to you, please.
Thank you. I was also the peace negotiator with Syria at a different time. So for several years, actually, the Syrian crisis was the focal point of Middle Eastern politics, and not just the Middle East. Waves of refugees rattled Europe in 2016 and affected elections in Europe and Brexit, and the shockwaves reached all the way to the American elections of the end of 2016. And not just refugees, terrorists. Thousands of ISIS recruits, who were European citizens, trained in Syria and Iraq and fought there and came back to Europe, and some of them are actually in sleeping cells of terrorism, and I hope that we will not hear again from them the way we did in Paris and Brussels, but they are there. So it's not a local crisis, it was a major international crisis, a terrible humanitarian tragedy. 500,000 killed, many, many wounded and maimed, almost 6 million refugees out of Syria, and almost half of the population displaced inside Syria. Now, one of the explanations for the complexity of this crisis was the fact that it was not one crisis, but 3 in 1. Domestic, regional, and international. The conflict between the regime and the opposition, a regional conflict between the camps supporting the regime and those supporting the opposition, and an international one. Now, the domestic crisis, the civil war itself, was resolved in December 2016, when the regime, with the Russian and Iranian help, captured Aleppo. That was the end of the civil war itself. The opposition does not practically exist, neither the political one nor the military one. There are still thousands of opposition fighters who are in the area of Idlib, but they are not operating out of Idlib. Now, winning the civil war did not mean normalization of Syria as a state. The regime controls maybe 60% of the national territory. There is the area of Idlib that I mentioned. There is an area actually conquered and managed by Turkey, and there is about at least 30% in the east and northeast that are dominated by the Kurds and the Syrian Democratic Front. It will be a while before a unitary Syrian state exists and exercises sovereignty over the national territory. There is the question of reconstruction, a very costly project. Where will the money come from? And some of those who can offer the money, the United States, European countries, will not offer the money without a return of the refugees. But the regime is not particularly interested in the refugees, and apparently the leadership is quite happy with the situation that Syria now is a more homogeneous country, less Sunnis, more, or proportionately more Alawites, and so forth. So the country is very far from normalization. Furthermore, the end of the domestic conflict meant an exacerbation of the regional and international conflict. Regionally, Iran, together with Russia, actually dominate Syria. Bashar al-Assad remained in power, but he is not fully an independent ruler. He is very much under the Iranian and Russian boots. Turkey is a major actor interested. Largely the Kurdish question, the preoccupation, not to say obsession, of Mr. Erdogan and Turkey is not to have an autonomous area in Syria, certainly not to have a Kurdish contiguity along the Turkish border and connected possibly to Iraq. And this is the main motivating force in Turkish policy now. Iran, after making this massive investment in keeping Assad in power, wants to benefit, and it has whetted the appetite of the Iranians, who want to use the presence in Syria in order to continue to build the regional hegemony in an effort to build a second Lebanon against Israel. You have Hezbollah and more than 100,000 missiles and rockets in Lebanon. They are now trying to build a military infrastructure in Syria. It's sort of an offensive-defensive attitude towards Israel. And of course, if Iran is making that investment, Israel is determined to prevent it. Now, internationally, the two major actors are Russia and the United States. During most of the Syrian crisis, the United States was absent. Determination by President Obama not to be drawn played a secondary role, and Russia came to play the major role. Under President Trump, there is a change, and more recently, a new team that was given charge of implementing a policy, the essence of which is to deny President Assad money for reconstruction and to continue to exert pressure on him and through him on Iran and Russia. But Russia is now the dominant actor in Syria. It has not just a naval base, but also an air base, and with a very small investment, in fact, has made actually substantial gains in Syria. So Assad is left with these two patrons, the Russians and the Iranians. He is actually more comfortable with the Russians because the Russians have limited ambitions. They don't want to manage, they want to penetrate the society or to expand Shiite influence. They are just interested in the hegemony and the projection of power and influence to the rest of the Middle East. And it's likely that Assad will try to play off the Russians against the Iranians. So where does it leave us? It leaves us with a situation whereby the Syrian crisis, as distinct from the Syrian civil war, is far from being over. The normalization of Syrian life and statehood and politics will take several more years, and the region and the world will have to continue to live with a Syrian problem that needs to be better managed in the future than it was managed in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Itamar, very much. Given that we have a pretty strict deadline to get you ready for dinner, I just want to bring up a couple things and ask people to react if they like. We haven't talked too much about the JCPOA and Iran and the Trump effort to create dissent in Iran. And I'm curious what you all think about the Trump policy. The European Union says it's trying to create this special investment vehicle. Nobody's sure it's going to work. Nobody's sure quite what it is. My sense is the Iranians themselves do not want to break out of the JCPOA, and the Europeans are trying to find them excuses so they can stay in. But I'm curious what you think the end result of this Trump policy against Iran is likely to be. Does anyone want to respond? Renaud?
I don't think that Trump will achieve his goal. His goal, he said, is a regime change in Iran.
He hasn't quite said that, but that's what he means. Yeah.
Yes. And he wants Iran to just accept his conditions. I don't think it will happen. I think that the result could be the contrary. We could have a radicalization of the Iranian regime with General Soleimani being the leader, the new leader of Iran. I think the Europeans are right, including American allies, the British, the French, the Germans, the Russians and the Chinese also, to try to do this vehicle. I hope it will work. I think it's very important that we don't accept that America makes a deal, negotiates a deal with a lot of effort, and then have it sanctioned in the United Nations under a resolution,
that's right.
and then just throw it.
And just walk it
so
away. Yeah.
I think, of course, the answer, but I agree with you that most of the population of Iran wants to keep the agreement. They don't want to go nuclear, but if they are pushed, if they are humiliated, there is something that we have to consider in the Middle East, dignity of nations.
Okay.
Americans should take
else
care of
that
that.
wants to-
And if they are pushed to the extreme, I think that all the American foreign policy in Iran would be counterproductive.
Great. Mona and Miguel, then Odeh. Okay. Please.
Well, I think that, first of all, an attack will fail to destroy all the facilities. This is one. But what will happen that it will radicalize more the Arab and Muslim worlds and generate more terrorism and anti-American activity. So military action against Iran is no good today because it will be a preventive strike. It won't accomplish much good, and it will fail, as I said, against organized militias and terrorists who are much better armed, and they are accepted by the local population, and they're prepared to die for their cause. So this is what you will get.
No, because I mean, part of what's interesting,
causing the Iranians to rally around the flag.
Right. I mean, because part of what interests me is the way Trump simply has done what the Saudis and the Gulfies have always wanted, right? Anyway, Miguel, what do you think?
Yeah, very, very shortly. I think the Europeans have to stick, demonstrate that the deal is going well, but we cannot exclude, we cannot ignore that Iran have an expansionist policy. So we cannot close our eyes and not see that Iran is in Gaza, is in Hezbollah. So the new agenda have to be built. So I think the deal now is how Europeans are going to say, okay, I stay with you on the nuclear deal, but we have to address other missile, anti-ballistic missile, the role of Iran in the region, and how we engage with the Arab world. So that is the new element, but maintaining our position.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because the EU3 have had at least 3 conversations with Iran on security issues outside nuclear, but they haven't really gone anywhere.
We have to.
Odeh, did you?
Before coming here Wednesday afternoon, I went to a session.
Talk louder.
I went to a session on Iran, and the official said the following: we want to apply maximum pressure. We want to be able to prevent Iran from exporting any oil.
Any oil.
Hoping that this will force the Iranians to come to the table, and the administration then will have a treaty that deals with missiles, terrorism. And if this doesn't work, then we have the military option. But we have heard about the military option from Bush. We have heard that from Obama. And if you look at Trump, at first he's unpredictable. He said he was against the war in Iraq. He said he was against the war in Syria. My interpretation, I don't think he wants to start a war. And therefore, I don't know where this policy is going, but perhaps Itamar could elaborate more.
Very briefly, I think that we do not know yet what the negotiations with North Korea, the Trump's negotiation, will actually produce. But the tactic of first threatening and scaring the other side and bringing them to the table that worked with North Korea, at least to get them to the table, will not work with Iran. You are dealing here with a proud nation, with an imperial past, and you will have to find a more accommodating way of getting them to the table, because I think ultimately it's in their interest to be there.
Yeah, because I mean, I know one of the things that the European negotiators are worried about is that Israel, Bibi, who has thought about bombing Iran at least twice before, and Obama tried to stop it, that Trump might not feel the same way and would get pulled into a military action that the United States doesn't even start.
I think the threat of military action by Israel were actually meant to motivate the United States to negotiate the agreement, but obviously Mr. Netanyahu was not happy with the specific agreement. But the idea of an Israeli military raid against the Iranian nuclear is very problematic. The capacity, it's only one country that really has the capacity to do that.
And that's us.
That's it.
No.
Or the United States. But the threat of that action, I think, played an important effect on diplomacy. But the beauty of a threat is that you use it vocally and not practice it.
Right.
Steve,
yes.
on something else.
I mean, just
30 seconds.
please, go ahead.
You know, as I look at the Middle East, and as I look at the violence, and as I look at the wars, it seems to me that all the actors don't take into account what someone once said, when you act in defense of your security and the integrity of your country, make sure that when you act, the act is moral, but more importantly, the end result should be moral. And I think that should be kept in mind.
One last question for you, if you'd just be brief, which I'll do it in a not very sophisticated way. Does Mohammed bin Salman survive the next year, or will he be moved out as crown prince? What does anyone think? Yes, no? Or don't want to touch it? Sorry, it's a question. Will Mohammed bin Salman last another year as crown prince or not?
I think he will do, because he was appointed by the king as the president of the Inquiry Commission on the Secret Services. The king did not appoint a vice prince, a vice crown prince. And I think that Mohammed bin Salman controls the surroundings of the king. I think the king hasn't got all his decisions with him.
That's right.
And we see that now Mohammed bin Salman has got the support of Russia, which is quite important.
Right.
So I don't think he will yield.
What about others? Sorry, I mean, we're running out of time.
No, I think that he will not survive another year. And this latest brutality has tarnished his reputation terribly, even though he is supported by the young people in Saudi Arabia. But he also has made a lot of enemies. The conservatives, the princes, the business, and now the international community is not very much for it. So there were suggestions that his brother, his younger brother, who is, I think, the ambassador in the United States, could take over.
Okay. Anyone else quickly? And then we'll end. Okay,
I think the question is not will he survive as crown prince, but what happens next. And Prince Hassan in Jordan can tell you that you can be crown prince for many years and then not become the king.
Okay. Listen, just please join me in thanking this panel. We've been great. We're on time. And thank you all very, very much.